Get ready, as this is going to be quite a lengthy tale. My fiance ended our relationship months prior to our wedding because his mother claimed I wasn't suitable for him. "You're nothing without my son. He can find someone much better," she spat. I simply chuckled and walked away. Now she calls me 10 times daily, crying and pleading for me to take back her broken, unhappy son. I still find it hard to believe I'm writing this. 3 months ago, I was excitedly planning what should have been the happiest day of my life with Brett, my partner of 3 years. Today, I find myself in my best friend's spare room, perusing apartment listings and trying to pinpoint where it all went awry. Brett and I met in 2021, and within 6 months, we were inseparable. After a year and a half, we moved in together. When Brett first introduced me to his parents, his dad, Walt, seemed friendly enough, though a little reserved. On the contrary, Susan spent the entire dinner grilling me about my family background, with a peculiar, tight-lipped smile that never reached her eyes. I recall mentioning that my father worked in construction and my mother was a school aide, noticing Susan's expression darken slightly before she quickly hid it. Later, Brett dismissed her behavior, saying she was just protective and traditional. He assured me that she came from a family that valued specific connections, but that he didn't care about such matters. I believed him because, well, love can make you blind. When Brett proposed last year, I was ecstatic. He popped the question during a weekend getaway at a charming little B&B upstate. We settled on a medium-sized wedding. Nothing extravagant, as we were both saving for a house. Trouble began almost immediately after we announced our engagement. Susan insisted on being involved in every single detail. Initially, it felt helpful. She had vendor contacts and offered to help coordinate since I had a demanding job. However, it soon became apparent that she was taking control. The venue I adored was deemed too shabby. The catering I preferred wasn't suitable for their family events. And the dress I loved was too cheap looking, according to her. Brett kept insisting it was simpler to just go along with her suggestions than to confront her about everything. I reluctantly agreed to compromise on certain aspects to maintain harmony, but it felt like 1,000 tiny wounds. Each decision taken from me chipped away at my excitement, turning wedding planning into a burden instead of a joyous occasion. The real turning point occurred during a dinner at their home about a month before the wedding. Susan had invited her friends Rita and Angela over, and I realized halfway through that I was being showcased in front of them for approval. They kept exchanging these knowing glances whenever I spoke. At one point, Rita asked where I vacationed as a child, and I laughed, thinking she was joking. When I explained that my family's idea of a holiday was camping at the park or visiting my grandma in Ohio, the table fell silent. After dinner, Susan cornered me in the kitchen while I was helping with the cleanup. She started what seemed like casual chit-chat about Brett's ex-girlfriend, Melissa, who apparently came from an influential family with a vacation home in the Hamptons. Then she mentioned how Brett had always been destined for greatness and hoped I wouldn't hinder his future. I felt as if I had been slapped when I asked her what she meant by that. She dropped all pretense, telling me that while I seemed nice enough, I clearly didn't have the right background to support Brett's future. She claimed my lack of refinement would eventually embarrass him in important circles and that I wouldn't know how to entertain properly or forge the right connections. I was so taken aback that I couldn't respond at first. When I finally found my voice and told her she was being incredibly rude, she just laughed this condescending laugh and remarked that my defensiveness proved her point. She insisted Brett deserved someone who could match his potential, not drag him down. I walked out of the kitchen and immediately told Brett we needed to leave. In the car, I was shaking as I recounted everything his mother had said. I anticipated outrage or anger on my behalf, but instead, he grew quiet, insisting she didn't mean it that way and was merely concerned about our future. He asked if perhaps I had misinterpreted her tone. That night marked our first significant argument. I couldn't believe he was defending her actions. He eventually admitted that his mother had been expressing worries about our compatibility for months. Apparently, she'd been filling his head with doubts about whether I would fit into the future he envisioned. The worst part? he was actually listening to her. Over the next 2 weeks, things rapidly declined. Brett became distant, often staying late at work. When he was home, he'd bring up random concerns about our relationship that had never existed before, like whether our different backgrounds would create issues when raising kids, or if I would be comfortable at his company events. Everything came to a head when Susan invited us over for another dinner, supposedly to clear the air. Brett practically begged me to attend, claiming she wanted to apologize. Like a fool, I believed him and went, only to find there was no apology. Instead, Susan spent the entire evening making snide remarks about my clothing, table manners, and the way I spoke. When Brett stepped outside to take a call, she leaned across the table and told me with chilling certainty that I was nothing without her son and that he could do much better than me, advising me to leave before I ruined his life with my mediocrity. As I began to cry, she rolled her eyes and said my emotional response only proved her point about my lack of composure. When Brett returned, I was gathering my things to leave. He asked what had happened, and Susan feigned concern, claiming I had overreacted to some gentle advice about wedding planning. I was done. In the car, I told Brett exactly what transpired and insisted he choose. Either we cut ties with his mother until she could respect me, or the wedding was off. I expected him to finally defend me, but instead, he pondered if maybe his mother was right, if we were rushing into things, or if we truly came from such different worlds that making it work was impossible. The man I loved, who had sworn he didn't care about status or background, was suddenly echoing his mother's elitist nonsense. I removed my engagement ring and placed it on the dashboard, instructing him to drop me off at Angela's instead of our apartment. He didn't even attempt to stop me when I exited the car. The following day, while Brett was at work, I packed most of my belongings from our apartment. I left my key and a note saying I would arrange to collect the rest later. I immediately blocked his mother's number, but kept Brett unblocked in case he came to his senses. He texted a few days later with a pitiful message about being confused and needing time to think. I replied that there was nothing to consider. Either he was willing to build a life with me based on love and respect, or he wasn't. His response was that perhaps we should take a break until after his big work project was finished, and then reassess. That was my answer. 3 years together, and he couldn't even break up with me properly. He just wanted to keep me hanging on while he figured things out. I told him not to contact me again. According to mutual friends, Brett has been telling people we mutually decided to end the wedding due to differing life goals. Meanwhile, I've immersed myself in rebuilding my life. Just yesterday, I received a voicemail from Susan. I have no idea how she got my new number, but she was sniffing and asking if we could discuss Brett. I didn't listen to the entire message before deleting it. Whatever drama is unfolding in their perfect little world is no longer my concern. I realized this was lengthy, but I needed to share. The wedding would have been next weekend. Instead, I'm treating myself to a solo trip to a beach rental I found on Airbnb. It's not the honeymoon I envisioned, but perhaps it's the fresh start I need. First update. Thank you so much for all the support on my original post. The first month after the breakup was truly a blur. I stayed on Angela's pull-out couch longer than I intended. She's genuinely a saint. Each morning, I'd wake up disoriented, reaching for Brett before remembering everything that happened. My appetite vanished, and I lost 10 pounds without trying. Angela began leaving protein bars on the coffee table because I would forget to eat. I spent a lot of time just staring at apartment listings without actually calling anyone. Making that move felt so final. Angela never pressured me, but after about 3 weeks, she gently suggested we check out a place that had just opened up in her friend's building. The apartment was nothing special, just a small one-bedroom with a kitchen barely large enough to turn around in. But it fit my budget and was only a 15-minute drive from work. I signed the lease the same day. Moving in was another challenge. I left most of my furniture behind at Brett's, because I couldn't handle arranging movers while feeling like an emotional wreck. Angela and her boyfriend helped me pick up the essentials from IKEA: a bed, a small couch, and a dining table that doubles as my desk. The apartment remained quite bare for weeks, as I couldn't muster the energy to make it feel like home. Work became my lifeline. I'd arrive early, leave late, and volunteer for extra projects just to avoid sitting alone in my empty apartment. My team lead noticed and began giving me more responsibilities, coordinating with other departments and training the new hire. It felt good to be needed and valued. About 2 months after the breakup, I ran into Nick, Brett's brother, at the grocery store. I almost hid behind the cereal display when I spotted him, but he recognized me first. I was surprised when he actually approached me, looking genuinely uncomfortable. He expressed his sorrow about what happened and mentioned he had argued with his mother regarding how she treated me. It was awkward, but strangely validating to hear someone from Brett's family acknowledge that I had been wronged. That's when I first learned that things weren't going well for Brett. I thanked him for the apology, but kept the conversation brief. I wasn't ready to be pulled back into that world, even peripherally. A week later, my old college roommate invited me to a party. I almost skipped it, but Angela practically pushed me out the door, insisting that I needed to remember how to be a person again. She was right, though I'd never admit it to her face. At the party, I met Matt. He was my roommate's cousin visiting from out of town. We ended up in the same conversation circle, discussing random topics. He asked for my number at the end of the night, and I surprised myself by giving it to him. Our first date was a casual coffee on a Sunday afternoon. He was easy to talk to, and for the first time in months, I spent hours without thinking about Brett. Matt works in a completely different field than Brett, lives in a modest apartment like mine, and has a refreshingly normal family that doesn't seem to care about summer homes or making the right connections. When I told him about my breakup, the condensed version, he just listened, without trying to fix anything or offer platitudes. About 3 months after the breakup, an unexpected opportunity arose at work. My company was restructuring, creating a new team, and they needed someone to take on more responsibilities. My extra efforts over the preceding months hadn't gone unnoticed. My manager encouraged me to apply, though she warned me the position would involve longer hours and more stress. I almost didn't go for it. My confidence was still shaky. However, I figured I had nothing to lose. The interview process was grueling. 3 rounds with various department heads, a presentation I stayed up until 2 a.m. perfecting, and a final meeting with upper management. I honestly didn't think I'd get it. There were other candidates with more experience. But 2 weeks later, my manager called me into her office to offer me the position. The promotion came with a significant raise, which meant I could finally stop stressing about making rent each month. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was enough to start rebuilding my emergency fund, which had been drained during the post-breakup chaos. I was still processing this news when I bumped into Rita, Susan's gossiping friend, at the mall. I was shopping for professional clothes for my new role when she spotted me coming out of a store. She acted overly friendly, as if we had been close before. After some awkward small talk, she revealed what felt like carefully planned information. Brett had lost his job. Apparently, the big project he had been working on, the one he used as an excuse to ask for a break from our relationship, had fallen apart spectacularly due to missed deadlines and poor management. Rita seemed to be watching my reaction closely, so I kept my expression neutral while she continued sharing details. Brett had been let go, and according to Rita, he had been struggling to find his footing ever since. She also mentioned with poorly disguised glee that Melissa had briefly rekindled things with Brett after our breakup, only to end it again after a few weeks. Rita suggested that perhaps I had dodged a bullet and winked at me. Later that week, I had another strange experience. I was having dinner with Matt at a new downtown restaurant when I spotted Susan across the room. She was with Walt and another couple I didn't recognize. Our eyes briefly met, and I quickly looked away, my heart racing. I expected her to ignore me or maybe give me one of her famous cold stares, but instead, she actually approached our table while Walt looked on with mild horror. She greeted me like we were old friends, commenting on how wonderful I looked. She asked about my new job. How did she even know about that? And complimented my outfit. Matt seemed confused but polite as I awkwardly introduced him. Susan's smile tightened almost imperceptibly when she realized I was on a date, but she maintained her friendly facade. Before leaving, she mentioned that everyone missed me and hoped we could catch up sometime. I managed a non-committal response, and she finally returned to her table. Matt took it in stride when I explained who she was, though he did remark that she seemed intense. The oddness continued. About a week later, Angela forwarded me a Facebook message she had received from Brett, inquiring about how I was doing and if I was seeing anyone. She hadn't responded, knowing I wouldn't want her to share details of my life with him. I appreciated her loyalty, but felt unsettled by his sudden interest. Through mutual friends, I learned more about Brett's situation. After losing his job, he had apparently moved back in with his parents while hunting for work. The perfect life Susan had envisioned for him was crumbling, and from what I heard, she wasn't handling it well. I tried not to dwell on them too much. My relationship with Matt was progressing naturally. No rush, just a genuine connection. We had been seeing each other for about 2 months, taking things slow. He came over to my apartment regularly, helping me gradually make the space feel more like home. We installed shelves for my books one weekend and hung artwork the next, small touches that made the place feel less temporary. My new position at work was challenging but rewarding. Some days, I'd come home completely drained, questioning if I was up to the task, but overall, I was proud of myself for taking the leap. My team respected me, and I was finally starting to believe I deserved the opportunity. Then, last Friday, everything shifted again. I was leaving work when my phone buzzed with a notification, a voicemail from an unknown number. I almost deleted it without listening, assuming it was just another spam call about my car's extended warranty, but something compelled me to play it. It was Susan, her voice thick with what sounded like tears. She said she had been trying to reach me, that she needed to talk about Brett, that he wasn't doing well, that she had made a terrible mistake, and that she would do anything to mend things between us. 6 months ago, this woman told me I was nothing without her son. Now she was practically begging for my help. I didn't call her back. Instead, I went to Matt's place as we had planned, but the voicemail kept replaying in my mind throughout the evening. Matt noticed something was off and asked what was wrong. When I told him, he didn't dictate what I should do or offer solutions. He simply asked what I wanted, what would bring me peace. I woke up the next morning to 3 more missed calls from Susan and a text from a number I didn't recognize but assumed was Brett's new phone. I haven't opened it yet. I suppose my question now is whether I should engage at all. Last update. It's been about a month since my last update, and I need to vent because things have taken a bizarre turn. When I ended my last post, I mentioned that Susan had left me a tearful voicemail and that I was unsure how to respond. After deliberating for 3 days on whether to return Susan's call, I finally decided to text Brett's number, the unknown one that had messaged me, asking what was going on. I figured a text was safer than a call, easier to ignore if things became awkward. Within 5 minutes, literally 5 minutes, my phone rang. It was Susan, not Brett. Apparently, she had been using his phone to reach me since I blocked her number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me, which was my first mistake. The Susan on the phone was nothing like the cold, judgmental woman I remembered. Her voice was shaky, almost desperate. She began by asking how I was doing, commenting on how well I looked when she saw me at the restaurant, still creepy, and then launched into what I can only describe as the most uncomfortable apology I've ever received. She admitted she had been awful to me, that she had misjudged me based on superficial factors, and that she regretted driving me away. I sat in stunned silence as she continued, explaining that Brett had been lost since our breakup, that he had spiraled after losing his job, that he was drinking excessively, and that he had made some poor financial choices. When I finally managed to ask why she was sharing all this, her answer made my skin crawl. She thought I could help him recover because I was such a stabilizing influence. She actually said that Brett needed someone responsible like me right now. The audacity of this woman, who once told me I wasn't good enough, now deciding I was exactly what her son needed when times got tough. I calmly told her that I was sorry Brett was struggling, but that we had been over for months. I mentioned that I was seeing someone else now. Her response was a dismissive comment about how these rebound relationships rarely last, and how Brett and I shared real history. Then she asked if we could meet for coffee to discuss the situation further. Against my better judgment, and despite Matt's concerned look when I told him, I agreed to meet Susan at a coffee shop the following weekend. I told myself it would provide closure. Perhaps I also wanted to see for myself how desperate things had gotten for her to come crawling back to the girl she once deemed beneath her son. When I arrived at the coffee shop, Susan was already there, looking noticeably different from the polished, superior woman I remembered. Her normally perfect hair was hastily pulled back in a ponytail, her makeup minimal, and she appeared tired. She had ordered me my favorite drink, a detail that was both thoughtful and unsettling because it indicated Brett had told her what I liked. The next hour was surreal. Susan detailed Brett's downfall in excruciating detail. After losing his job, he tried to maintain his lifestyle while job hunting, quickly depleting his savings. He made a poor investment in some friend's startup that went nowhere, maxed out 2 credit cards, and was now living in his old bedroom at their house, sleeping until noon and barely applying for jobs. Throughout her monologue, I kept expecting her to ask me directly to take Brett back. Instead, she did something more manipulative. She kept saying things like, "He was at his best when he was with you, and you always motivated him so well, and he listens to you in a way. He never listens to me." When I reminded her that she once thought I wasn't good enough for her son, she actually teared up and said she had been shielding her son from the wrong things and should have valued my steadiness more than Melissa's connections. I almost laughed at how transparent she was being. I was suddenly steady rather than boring, responsible rather than lacking ambition. I left that meeting feeling oddly hollow. I had expected satisfaction from seeing Susan brought low, but mostly I felt pity mixed with lingering anger. I told her I would think about talking to Brett, but made no promises. That should have been the conclusion, but it wasn't. The calls started the very next day. Susan called to follow up on our coffee meeting, then again to inform me that Brett had asked about me, and then again to mention a job opening she thought Brett might qualify for, wondering if my company was hiring. Every single day, I began, letting the calls go to voicemail. The messages grew increasingly desperate. She mentioned that Brett's father was threatening to cut him off financially if he didn't get his act together soon. She lamented how their family friends were asking uncomfortable questions about Brett's situation. She even brought up my parents once, saying she would love to make amends with them too. Brett's brother texted me one evening to apologize for his mother's behavior. He explained that Brett's spiral had been worse than the family had let on. Apparently, Brett had started drinking heavily after our breakup, which contributed to his poor performance at work. Nick mentioned that Susan was partly blaming herself for pushing me away, seeing it as the beginning of Brett's decline. But he quickly added that Brett was responsible for his own choices and that I shouldn't feel pressured to get involved. I appreciated Nick's honesty and the fact that someone in that family recognized I wasn't responsible for fixing Brett. Meanwhile, things with Matt were getting more serious. He had been incredibly understanding about the whole situation, never pressuring me one way or another. We started discussing the possibility of moving in together when his lease ended in a few months. The contrast between his calm support and the chaos of Brett's family was stark. About 2 weeks after our coffee meeting, Susan escalated her efforts by showing up at my workplace. I was walking to my car after work when I spotted her waiting in the parking lot. My heart sank. This was crossing a major line. She approached me with frantic energy, clutching a folder that supposedly contained Brett's resume and asking if I could put in a good word for him at my company. I was furious. I told her firmly that her behavior was inappropriate and that she needed to stop contacting me. Her face crumpled, and she began crying right there in the parking lot, claiming she didn't know what else to do, that Brett wasn't listening to her, and that she was desperate to help her son. A few of my co-workers witnessed this uncomfortable scene, which was mortifying. I ended up guiding Susan to a bench away from the main entrance and calmly explained that I couldn't help her or Brett, that our relationship was over, and that she needed to respect my boundaries. Eventually, she left. For the rest of the week, I received curious looks from co-workers who had seen the parking lot scene. Angela, who also works at my company, fielded questions from people wanting to know who the crying woman was. It was embarrassing and infuriating. Then, Brett himself finally reached out. He sent a long text message apologizing for his mother's behavior and for how things had ended between us. He acknowledged he had made a huge mistake by listening to her instead of defending our relationship. He said he missed me every day and had been too ashamed to contact me directly after everything that happened. Reading his message, I felt nothing. No flutter of lingering feelings. No satisfaction at his regret. Just exhaustion and a vague sense of closure. I showed the message to Matt, who read it silently. I decided not to respond to Brett immediately. I needed time to contemplate what, if anything, I wanted to say. But Susan didn't give me that time. She called the next morning, asking if I had received Brett's message and what I thought about it. When I told her I felt it was inappropriate for her to involve herself in our communication, she became defensive, insisting she was just trying to help. That's when something snapped inside me. I told Susan, in a voice so calm it surprised, even me, that I was blocking her number after this call. I warned her that if she contacted me at work again, I would report it as harassment and that Brett was an adult who needed to solve his own problems instead of sending his mother to fix them. Before hanging up, I added one final thought. Perhaps if she had raised her son to value people for their character rather than their social standing, he wouldn't be in this predicament. That evening, I finally responded to Brett's text. I told him I forgave him for how things ended, because holding on to anger wasn't helping either of us. But I also made it clear that we had no future together, that I had moved on, and that he needed to do the same. I suggested he seek professional help for his drinking and gambling, and that he needed to stop letting his mother fight his battles. I concluded by wishing him well and asking him not to contact me again. I blocked both their numbers immediately after sending that message. It felt like shutting a door that had been ajar for too long. However, the next day, I received an Instagram DM from Susan. She had created a new account just to message me. This time, her tone was angry. She accused me of being heartless for abandoning Brett when he needed me the most, claiming I was throwing away years of history out of pride. That last bit almost made me laugh. Susan talking about pride as if she hadn't destroyed our relationship herself. I didn't respond. I just blocked that account too. But she found other ways to contact me. Emails from new addresses, even a handwritten letter mailed to my apartment. Each message was more desperate than the last. The final straw came last weekend. Matt and I were having dinner at my apartment when there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Brett standing there, looking disheveled and clearly having had a few drinks, with Susan hovering anxiously behind him. I was so shocked I couldn't speak at first. Matt came up behind me, asking who was at the door, and the look on Brett's face when he realized I had someone else there was almost pitiable. What followed was awkward and uncomfortable. Brett attempted to talk about our past and how much he regretted his choices, while Susan kept interjecting with comments about how good we were together. I didn't invite them in. Instead, I stepped into the hallway and partially closed the door behind me. I gently but firmly told Brett that this wasn't appropriate, that showing up unannounced at my home crossed a serious boundary, and that I had meant what I said in my message about moving on. Brett's response surprised me. He turned to his mother and said this was exactly why he hadn't wanted to come, that he had told her this would only make things worse. Then he apologized to me again, not for the breakup, but for not protecting me from his mother back then and now. I haven't heard from either of them in the 5 days since that encounter. Nick texted me once to apologize again and let me know he was taking Brett to his first Gamblers Anonymous meeting. I thanked him, but didn't ask for further updates. Matt and I are going away for a weekend trip soon. I've changed my email address and asked my manager to be vigilant for unwanted visitors. Life goes on, and surprisingly, it's better than I could have imagined a year ago when I was planning a wedding to the wrong person. I'm not sure if I'll need to post another update, but if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, please make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more thrilling content. Your support means a lot. Thank you for being part of this journey.